I'm Jefferson Singer, the Dean of the College and the Falk Foundation Professor of Psychology from Connecticut College. And I'm pleased to welcome you all tonight to this evening where we introduce this year's selection of One Book, One Region. This marks the fourth year in a row that Connecticut College has partnered with the One Book, One Region initiative. And once again, this selection will serve as our summer read selection for first-year students. Previous novels have included Exit West by Moshid Hamid, and this was a book that we shared about migration and about two lovers of the Muslim faith that make their way westward, and about the global response to migration, which is quite mixed, and they experience a great deal of struggle in that. We also previously shared with One Book, One Region and summer reading at Con, Homegoing by Jesse. And this was a multi-generational saga set in Ghana and making its way to the United States, also about the coming of age of young women. So tonight, though, we're going to address our next book. And this year's book, I think you'll find equally thought-provoking. Its subject matter is deeply relevant to many people, as nearly half of the American population is touched in some form by addiction. And we believe that tonight's discussion will be the start of many more important discussions throughout the region inspired by this book. In a moment, you'll hear about our selected book from Betty Ann Ryder, the former director of the Groton Public Library and the founder of One Book, One Region initiative in southeastern Connecticut. Then Tracy Reiser, One Book, One Region committee member and former Connecticut College Associate Dean of Community Learning, will introduce our guest speaker this evening, Ginny Anderson, an assistant professor of theater at Connecticut College. Professor Anderson will present on the book's themes, and then we'll have some time to ask questions. But before we begin our program, I'd like to thank our community partners, without whom this initiative would not be possible. And before I express thanks to each of them, I just want to say something about the idea of partnership. One Book, One Region is an initiative which is about people sharing their love of a particular book with each other. And for us at Connecticut College, the idea that we can share our love of a particular book with community members and they can share that love back with us has become something that is very precious for us. It's a way of expressing our fellowship and connection with the wider community of New London County. And it's something that I think our students are gaining a foothold in understanding what this community is about. And so it's exciting to see, as you'll see on the program, there are many events that are taking place both at Connecticut College, but then also in the larger community. And one of our hopes is that our students will be making their way down the hill from Connecticut College to some of these events and sharing them with you. And then, of course, we'll be welcoming you to come to Connecticut College when the author of our selected book speaks later in the fall. So to get to specific thanks, I want to say thank you to Bank Square Books, to Connecticut College Humanities, to Connecticut College's Office of the President, the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut, the Frank Loomis Palmer Fund, Bank of America, and the Connecticut Alliance of Foster and Adoptive Families, the Alliance for Living, the Department of Children and Families in Norwich, my colleagues at the college, and of course the libraries of Eastern Connecticut. And when you hear that array of people who have become involved in sponsoring and supporting this initiative, you understand how multifaceted this book actually is and how it's going to be a book that brings in so many different aspects of our community. I'd also like to thank again our dining partner Brigade for our food and beverages that we've had tonight. And so at this time, I'd like to invite Betty Ann Ryder to the podium to formally introduce this year's book. Betty Ann?
Thank you, Jefferson, and good evening, everyone. 2019 marks the 17th year of One Book, One Region, and we thought this year you were ready for a challenge. Over the years, we've read fiction and nonfiction from both well-known and unknown authors, but this year we're asking you to try something different, a book that is a graphic memoir. Some of you may liken it to a comic book. But Hey Kiddo by Jarrett Krosoczka is so much more. And in case you don't believe me, here's what Terry Gross had to say when she interviewed Jarrett on Fresh Air. And you'll notice I'm going to say Jarrett from now on because Krosoczka is, is a mouthful. But I did look it up, and that is how you say it, as far as I can tell. So anyway, Terry Gross interviewed Jarrett on Fresh Air on NPR, and she said, "It's a graphic memoir, which is to say it's a book of text and illustration, kind of like a comic book geared to young adults. But I'm an adult, and I loved it, and we think you will too." Hey Kiddo tells the story of Jarrett's imperfect family. His mother is a heroin user, his father doesn't appear until Jarrett is a teen, and he's raised by his grandparents, Joe and Cheryl, who drink, smoke, yell at each other, and yet prove again and again how much they love him. Throughout his school years, Jarrett was not an athlete, not particularly good in social situations, and art became his refuge. The saving power of art is evident in his life. He says, "When I was a kid, I draw to get attention from my family. In junior high, I drew to impress my friends. But now that I'm in my teens, I fill sketchbooks just to deal with life, to survive." And luckily for us, his annual gift from his grandfather was a new Tupperware container to store his favorite drawings. Hey Kiddo is interspersed with original artwork created by his younger self. Jarrett is a New York Times best-selling author and illustrator with more than 30 books to his credit. Titles include several picture books and his wildly popular Lunch Lady graphic novel series. Hey Kiddo was nominated for a National Book Award. And now I'd like to share with you a very short video clip of the author so you can hear about the story in his own words.
When I was a kid being raised by my grandparents, there was a lot that went unspoken in my house. My grandparents didn't talk about where my mother went, didn't talk about who my father was. It was just suddenly this new reality that I was living with my maternal grandparents, and they were now going to be raising me. And I had, a childhood filled with wonder and fun and books, but also some dark moments that I didn't understand. And it wasn't until I was, an emerging adolescent that my grandparents sat me down to say, "So this is what's going on. Your mother has been in jail. She's a drug addict, and that's why she hasn't been around. And your father, he took off before you were born." I started thinking about writing this book when I was in my early 20s. I wasn't ready to write it, and I needed more perspective. I then became a parent myself, and all of this energy was leading me to writing a graphic memoir about growing up, and that book is Hey Kiddo, and it will be here in October. And it's wild to think that it's coming in this calendar year because I have been thinking about this book more or less for half of my life. The story is told from the perspective of my teenage self as he's dealing with his relationship with his mother and her drug addictions and his grandparents' alcoholism, and then meeting, I met my father when I was 17. I hope that kids who are living through a similar situation will also feel empowered. If they feel shame, I hope they can learn from this book that it's not their fault, and they can rise above it. They have the power to grow up and become the adults they want to be and carve their own path in life. And so I can't wait for you to see Hey Kiddo. It's coming out soon.
And we do want to thank Scholastic for sharing that with us and hope it sparked your interest in reading the book. So why Hey Kiddo this year? By choosing to focus on the opioid crisis and its effect on families, we hope to keep the spotlight on this timely and important topic. Earlier this week, a statistic on NPR caught my attention. More Americans will die this year from opioid overdoses than died in the Vietnam War. This is truly an issue that has or will touch all of our lives. Libraries and other community partners will be offering programs, book discussions, and other activities this summer to enhance our understanding of the crisis, and will also be offering opportunities to explore the healing power of art. Please pick up a copy of the calendar and join us. There's lots of copies on the table as you leave. Once again, I want to thank all of you, our readers and supporters, for joining us to celebrate 17 years of connecting public libraries with high school and college students, book clubs, and interested readers around the region, all through the power of reading just one book. So you're going to hear more about this as the night goes on, but Tracy Reiser is up next, and I want you all to know and remember that we have her to thank for this collaboration between the wider reading community and Connecticut College. 4 years ago, in her role as Assistant Dean for Community Learning, she was willing to consider and then champion the idea of bringing One Book, One Region to the Connecticut College campus. She's now retired, but we're fortunate to have her continued enthusiasm on the One Book Committee.
Thank you, Betty Ann. I am delighted to join in welcoming you to the One Book, One Region kickoff event. Thank you, BioCT Innovation Commons and Kim Kelly for hosting us once again. How about that delicious reception? Thank you, Brigade, Ryan Kennedy, and Tyler and team. The Obor selection is Hey Kiddo by the author Jarrett Krosoczka. But Jarrett also writes a very popular children's series called the Lunch Lady series with a very special heroine. Great books to share with the children in your lives. The heroine is a lunch lady, a lunchroom lady in a school. And I am very pleased now to introduce Ryan Kennedy, who is one of our own local heroes in our own New London Public Schools.
Thank you, Tracy. This seems like a pretty cool event. I didn't really know about it before Tracy reached out to Dan, who is my boss and the founder of Brigade, to see if we would come and be interested in doing the food for the event. But a little bit of background on what Brigade is. Essentially, we are chefs who have stopped our former careers, whatever they were, to work into schools, work in public schools, specifically New London, Connecticut. We piloted a program there 3 years ago where we put chefs in schools, me being the first that was hired. Tyler came on about a month later, and we've run every kitchen in New London Public Schools, scratch cooking since that time. We do community meals, which is more or less how we met Tracy. So we host a community meal roughly every other Wednesday or every few Wednesdays during the school year, where we serve food to the public for $5. We invite the community in. But essentially, Tyler and I and everyone else sort of, we deal with a lot of hey kiddos. We deal with a lot of kids that come across our paths every single day, and essentially that's what we do. We try to, there's the healing power of art that I heard spoken about before, and we kind of tried to work with the healing power of food. Previously, a lot of us cooked in fine dining or catering, weddings, whatever it was, and we were more or less feeding the people who were pretty well fed, and we decided to try to dedicate our lives to feed other people who maybe had empty bellies and difficult homes and things like that, to see if we could maybe reshape the American diet as a very lofty goal, but in a smaller sense, in a more micro sense, maybe like give a kid who maybe doesn't have all the things going for them just a nice prepared meal that was prepared with thought and care. So all the food that you sampled today roughly has been intertwined in our schools. Some are hits, some are misses. But like the hummus, for instance, was a dish that Tyler came up with that we've run in the schools a number of times to try to do more plant-based foods. We've had some success with it, but it's probably a dish that we're the most proud of. That whole dish, when it's a full plate and a compliant plate, it maybe cost us, 88 cents to make. So we're dealing with very limited budgets as well. We deal with very strict nutritional guidelines, strict procurement regulations, very difficult timelines. But I would say this year in New London, we average about somewhere between 800 and 1 million meals served per year. And that doesn't count like the catering community meals. We probably serve somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 meals. During the summer, we'll serve upwards of 30,000 to 40,000 meals. So we do that all from scratch, more scratch cooking than we've done in our previous restaurant lives. And we've learned to make a lot of things that we weren't really great at making before. But anyway, we appreciate all the support, specifically from Tracy, from Connecticut College, from all of our other community partners, and we're glad to be a part of this, so thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. Now it is my great honor to introduce Professor Ginny Anderson. Ginny Anderson is an assistant professor of theater at Connecticut College, where she teaches a variety of courses concerning theater and culture, directs the main stage, and serves on the steering committee for the Horan Center for Community Action and Public Policy. Professor Anderson is a core faculty member for the college's public health interdisciplinary pathway as well. She earned her PhD in drama from Tufts University, an MA in performance and culture from Goldsmiths College, University of London, an MA in drama from Stanford University, and a BA in English and theater from Carleton College. Ginny is the 2018 recipient of Connecticut College's Helen Mulvaney Teaching Award, presented to an assistant professor who regularly offers classes that challenge students to work harder than they thought they could and to reach unanticipated levels of academic achievement. She teaches a range of courses, including theater of the AIDS epidemic, theater history, musical theater in American culture, and this fall she will introduce a course on theater for young audiences. In February, she will direct the Tony Award-winning musical Fun Home, based on another graphic memoir, this one by Alison Bechdel. The National Center for HIV, STD, and TB Prevention, Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and the AIDS Action Committee of Massachusetts have recognized Professor Anderson's dedication to advocacy and the arts. Her essay, Performing Interventions, The Politics and Theater of China's AIDS Crisis in the Early 21st Century, appears in the recent viral dramaturgies, HIV and AIDS in Performances in the 21st Century. Her current book project concerns the on and off stage history of Broadway theater in the AIDS epidemic. She is also developing work on representations of child welfare system in the United States. Professor Anderson is proud to volunteer and partner with New London's Alliance for Living on a number of projects, including her course Theater of the AIDS Epidemic and bringing the AIDS Memorial Quilt to Connecticut College twice since her arrival in 2013. It is her goal to bring sections of the quilt to the community every 4 years so that every Connecticut College student has the opportunity to experience firsthand the love and lives of those touched by the ongoing AIDS epidemic. Most importantly, to her identity, though, Ginny is a foster and adoptive mother. She and her spouse, Steve Luber, received the 2019 Outstanding Foster Parent Award from the Connecticut Alliance of Foster and Adoptive Families and the Norwich Department of Children and Families. This award was bittersweet for them, for they know firsthand how love and anguish necessarily coexist for some of our youngest citizens and for those who strive to care for them. Please join me in extending the warmest welcome to Professor Ginny Anderson.
Good evening, everyone. What did you see? Nearly 20 years ago, and spoken in a light German accent that I won't try to replicate this evening, Karl Weber, my directing professor at Stanford, left me with some of the most important words in my professional life. What did you see? He would ask my classmates and I this question each week, following every theater directing exercise he had assigned, no matter what we had prepared and made into a piece of theater, whether a poem, a page from the phone book, an amazing exercise, or a memory presented from multiple points of view. Karl had no interest in our immediate intellectual interpretation of one another's work. Only an answer to the deceptively rich question, what did you see? Carl knew the power of visual storytelling. He knew that sometimes images speak to the heart and imagination more than words on a page or a screen ever could. But we know that. We know the image of the unidentified man standing before the line of tanks in Tiananmen Square 30 years ago. We can't forget the image of the body of a little Syrian boy in a red t-shirt and brown sandals still on his feet, washed up on the shore, of a beach in Turkey in 2015. Sometimes there aren't words, but there needs to be understanding. Empathy is a powerful thing, a necessary thing. I firmly believe that it makes us better, kinder. Hey Kiddo promises to do just that. Now, another similar necessary note before we begin. You'll notice that I alternate between Jarrett and Krosoczka in my remarks. It began unconsciously, but I realized that I use the former when referencing Jarrett as almost a character, and Krosoczka as an author-narrator. It's important, of course, for us all to remember that they're one and the same. Neither is a fictional character, and neither is a removed observer. When you begin Jarrett Krosoczka's graphic memoir, it can be tempting to gloss over the opening credits as they are. Our eyes are drawn to the cars, to the youthful passenger looking out the window as the world goes by. He is, after all, in the foreground, and one rightly assumes they've met our protagonist. But if we take our time with this image, we'll notice a car going in another direction. We'll notice a Polar Seltzer billboard advertisement. A polar bear wearing a t-shirt waves in greeting while foreshadowing a gift that young Jarrett receives from his mother 83 pages later. His older narrator self will explain, when you don't see your mom much, you treasure anything she gives you. We often skip over the opening credits. Our eyes may fall to the copyright information if we're preparing citations. But let's linger a little longer. Jarrett Krosoczka dedicates this book to his grandparents, Joe and Cheryl, to his mom, Leslie, but he also dedicates this book to every reader who recognizes his experience. I see you. As we embark on this year's One Book, One Region journey together, I invite you to see those readers too. I invite you to have your own experience recognized by a community who cares deeply. Yes, ask yourself, what do you see as you take in the beautiful images at the heart of Hey Kiddo? But don't stop there. I ask you, what will you see? Will you see the community organizations that need recognition, volunteer work, and financial support? Will you see the community groups collecting luggage for children so they don't need to use trash bags when they gather their belongings when they enter the foster care system? Will you see the confusion and the pain caused by assumptions? As when well-meaning teachers say things like they do to young Jarrett, okay, class, we're all going to draw our families. It's important for us to celebrate our mommies and daddies at home who take care of us. Surely you have somebody at home who takes care of you. Will you see the love that coexists with pain and memory, even when addiction has taken its toll? I first encountered Hey Kiddo last fall during one of those NPR driveway moments. It might have been Terry Gross. It's quite possible. This, I think, was actually a separate piece. It was a short interview with Jarrett Krosoczka about Hey Kiddo that left me in stunned recognition. He was speaking to a familiar world with clarity of voice that I knew firsthand was sorely needed. As I listened, I was reminded of the hours I spent as a housing advocate helping clients at Boston's AIDS Action Committee to fill out extensive waitlist applications. Many were in recovery and just needed the stability in their lives that would allow them to take care of their health, and often for their families. I was reminded of my training to become a foster parent through Connecticut's Department of Children and Families. And I was reminded of the difficult circumstances that so many children in our region face. I was reminded of how addiction does not replace love. I was reminded of a production of the musical Falsettos that changed my life by transforming a teenager with, let's say, a limited sphere of concerns into an activist with a deeper understanding of family and love. Art, Krosoczka reminds us in Hey Kiddo, can do that. Not bad for an NPR driveway moment. Leslie tells Jarrett, we all have our stories of how we came to be, you know. And she's right. No matter our background, our age, our life experience, we have those moments that have defined us. We have those people who have believed in us, who have given us a chance, who have given us the benefit of the doubt. And perhaps most importantly, we all have opportunities to be that person for someone else. So I've been asked to provide some context and to introduce just a few of the many themes for our community conversations around Hey Kiddo. Some of you are yet to begin. Some of you have already read it a few times. I'm going to speak to some specific moments, hopefully without spoiling too much. So there are many ways to begin to explore the themes of Hey Kiddo. I often ask my students to pay attention to the title of a piece. Pay attention to the first line, the first image. Usually I'm talking about plays. It works here too. Pay attention to the last line and image. These pieces often augment important themes. So let's start with that title. The first time we hear the title spoken in the book, I encourage you to take in the whole page. It's a page devoted to images of love. Indeed, Cheryl caresses newborn Jarrett as she expresses, "Oh, I'm so in love." Joe reassures Leslie, Jarrett's mother, that everything is going to be more than fine, before turning to our young protagonist and greeting simply, "Hey, kiddo." The love and hope for the future on this page are palpable, aren't they? Joe, Jarrett's grandfather, is the one to give voice to the title first, and the mutual love in their relationship is honored in this introduction of the book's title. Whatever else happens in this book, it is a story about love. The next time we hear the title, it's spoken by Leslie, when she sees Jarrett for the first time after she has begun her recovery in a halfway home. There is nothing but love in this image. Love despite the past, love despite some of the harshest circumstances. Throughout the entire book, in fact, only Joe and Leslie say the title words, "Hey, kiddo." The words are precious and they are reserved for them in memory on the page. Consider what ties Joe and Leslie together. Consider what they mean to Jarrett. So let's move to the first line. We know from the very subtitle that by the end of the book, Jarrett has lost his mother, found his father, and dealt with family addiction. It makes it sound so simple, doesn't it? This makes the first line of the book so very important thematically. The images of a cemetery that fill the prologue establish death as a looming presence. From a parked car, a voice encourages, "Come on, get behind the wheel. Take control." Jarrett needs to take control of his life, take control of his story. Drawing was his way to assert control when so much was in flux around him. And just as his grandfather encourages him on the page, so too does Jarrett Krosoczka encourage his reader. Come on, get behind the wheel. The book ends with photographs of actual high school graduation cards that Jarrett received from his grandparents and his mother. I encourage you, pay attention to those moments that Krosoczka has included scanned images of actual pieces instead of drawing them himself. It always happens for a reason. Through the very end, he doesn't allow us to forget that his mother was a real person, a complex person who loved her son deeply. There's another notable aspect to these images. Throughout the book, he often maintains some privacy by covering up portions of cards and letters. As readers, we sometimes walk the line of voyeurism, I find. But Krosoczka has generously invited us in. With these final images, he presents the love in these notes clearly and in full. I'd like to invite you to consider a few more themes in Hey Kiddo as we begin our community read. They all find expression through the interplay of text and image. The placement of images on the page allows us to see how the layers of Leslie's life coexisted. Here we see her snuggling with her son, the sweet exchange resonating beautifully and painfully as we consider the artist's experience of remembering as he draws. "When I grow up, I want to marry you." "Silly boy, you can't marry your mama." "But why not? I love you. And I love you, and I always will, no matter what." On the opposite page, Krosoczka recalls random happy memories with his mother, playing with toys, bath time, cereal eating habits, and Halloween. But on the same page, without clearly defined boundaries, Krosoczka recalls, "I also remember strangers coming in and out of the house." The visual representation of Jarrett's perspective of his world as a child is crucial. Like all of us, young children don't always have words for what's going on around them. They do have nightmares, as illustrated with the same vivid honesty Krosoczka uses to illustrate every aspect of his life. So now I'm going to briefly ask you Carl's question. Throw it out there. Don't pay attention to the words. What do you see? What do you actually see going on here? So we're aware of the other people. We're aware of him playing. In a way, we're aware of a child simply being a kid. He's playing with a car. On the most basic level, we have a kid playing with a toy. It's that simple. Meanwhile, as we take in these images, the older Jarrett narrates. "I wouldn't see my mother for a long while after that day. Lynn and Holly would later tell me that after they babysat me over on Bower Street, they would come home in tears, telling Joe and Cheryl that they needed to do something. They needed to get me out of that house. And when I slept over at my grandparents' house one night, I remarked at how amazed I was that they served me breakfast in the morning. As a 3-year-old, I was getting my cereal on my own because I was waking up in an empty house. Determined to keep me, Joe convinced Leslie to sign the paperwork relinquishing parental rights. Joe became my legal guardian. The only way Leslie would sign the agreement was if Shirley wasn't a part of it. Leslie knew Joe would take care of me, but she didn't trust her mother, not with their fiercely argumentative history. I didn't know any of this. I just knew I had a new home." The words express all that was happening around this kid. He's just a kid playing with his cars. We simultaneously experience Jarrett's world as a 3-year-old and as an older narrator, a split perspective. The juxtaposition couldn't be more powerful or more interdependent. The story can't be told without both perspectives, and a graphic memoir is the perfect medium. Perhaps this is why it is so remarkable when Jarrett's childhood collided with a reality usually reserved for adults. I knew in that moment when my grandfather told me the plain truth, that his mother struggled with addiction and had been in jail, that life wouldn't be the same for me. It didn't change the circumstances, but it shifted my perspective. Consider, what are those moments when you've been forced to grow up? What are the moments when, in retrospect, there was a very clear before and after? There are echoes of this idea later, as when Holly says to Jarrett after he has discouraged his grandparents from coming to his 8th grade graduation dinner, "You can apologize, but you can't always undo what you do." This is when I want to step back to emphasize the resonance of Hey Kiddo in our community, to begin to consider those who have been forced to grow up too soon. These headlines are just a few from our region. The local stories around addiction are, I actually hadn't realized this before, the local news stories, they tend to be centered around overdoses and fatalities, and they don't begin to capture the everyday reality of people who are living with and near addiction. So I know that, I think off the top of my head, 2 of them reference 5 people. We have this sense of these kind of small, isolated incidents, right? So lest we think the numbers are limited to those represented by individual stories, let's consider them cumulatively. The challenges remain, and the need for a compassionate response only grows. Just 1 week ago, the New York Times published this story, Inside the Elementary School, where addiction sets the curriculum. Though focused on a community in Ohio, the circumstances described could be anywhere. The reality that is depicted is familiar to those who have already read Hey Kiddo. I hope you'll forgive me from reading at length the first couple of paragraphs from this piece. So as reported by Dan Levin. Inside an elementary school classroom decorated with colorful floor mats, art supplies and building blocks, a little boy named Riley talked quietly with a teacher about how he had watched his mother take knockout pills and had seen his father shoot up 1,000 times. Riley, who is 9 years old, described how he had often been left alone to care for his baby brother while his parents were somewhere else getting high. Beginning when he was about 5, he would heat up meals of fries, chicken nuggets, and spaghetti rings in the microwave for himself and his brother. He said, "That was all I knew how to make." Riley, who is in foster care and who officials asked not to be fully identified because of his age, is among hundreds of students enrolled in the local school district who have witnessed drug use at home. Like many of his classmates at Minford Elementary School, Riley struggles with behavioral and psychological problems that make it difficult to focus, school officials said, let alone absorb lessons. "If you're worried about your parents getting arrested last night, you can't retain information," said Kendra Rose Cram, a teacher at Minford Elementary, who was hired this past academic year to teach students how to cope with trauma. Over the past 9 months, she led several classes a day and met every week in one-on-one sessions with up to 20 students who have experienced significant trauma. Last academic year, 4 kindergartners lost parents to fatal overdoses, and a 5th had a parent killed in a drug-related homicide. Some of the children were in the same room with their parents when they died. "We have all these kids who are in survival mode," Ms. Cram said. In this piece, Levin describes the classroom as a battleground in the war against drug addiction, where the next generation will be saved or lost. The classroom is a powerful, motivating place for Jarrett and Hey Kiddo. The power of art is how Jarrett is coaxed into going to school in the first place. Describing kindergarten, his grandfather says, "You like to draw, right? You'll get to draw all the time," he promises. It was his grandparents who enrolled him in classes at the Worcester Art Museum. Yet in Hey Kiddo, it's not only art classes that help him to cope. Encouragement comes from a variety of teachers, even the one who sent him out in the hall for drawing a parody of him in class. It's an amazing scene, it's this long, it's awesome. And from them, he learned more than technique. Discouraging him from conforming to established styles, one teacher offers a life lesson through his instruction. He says, "You have a really good thing going for you. You have your own style, some great line work, I dig it. Continue to explore that, all right?" We all have the power to teach, to influence. And we never know exactly what will stick. Sometimes those lessons come in classes. My teacher, Carl Weber, taught me how images are as important to storytelling as words on a page. He also believed in me and encouraged me to pursue directing. Sometimes those lessons come in encouraging notes from a relative or squeals of delights from children, as Jarrett Krosoczka experienced. But most of all, and for all of us, they come from seeing and from being seen. This is an image of Jarrett visiting his mom in a halfway home, but keep looking. I won't make you answer this time, but what do you see? So many more kids than just him. Each of them was brought to this Christmas party out of circumstances beyond their control, but each of them is there. We see them. We see Jarrett, but so too do we see other kids like him, unnamed but still very much there. There's a common interpretation of musical theater that when words fail, music takes over. In Hey Kiddo, Jarrett Krosoczka uses images to communicate what words cannot express but the heart needs to say. It is, after all, not only a graphic novel, but a graphic memoir. This is his story, and these are real people who loved him, and real people he loved. Through my training and personal experience, I know how much Jarrett's story will resonate with families across our region. I know the tears it will evoke and the laughter it will spark. Our region needs more foster families. We need compassion for those struggling with addiction. We need to see that statistics on news reports don't represent the actual toll of the opioid epidemic. For each overdose death reported in headlines, there are dozens of people who don't OD, and for each of them, there are family members affected who themselves need our support. They certainly don't need our judgment. Finally, we need to see not just the value, but the necessity of artistic expression. My advice to you as we launch Hey Kiddo as our selection for One Book, One Region is to take your time. Don't rush through it. Krosoczka tells us what will happen in the book with his subtitle. What makes it special is how it happens. Spend time with each image that strikes you and ask yourself, what do I see? But then, and this is key, look up from the book, outward to your community, and ask yourself, what do I see? What will I see? And what will I do? I want to thank the One Book, One Region organizers for choosing such an important book. As we launch our community conversations, I want to thank the community members for what they're about to do. Through conversations about Hey Kiddo at local libraries, community centers, coffee shops, schools, you will open your minds, you will open your hearts to one another. As Jarrett's story ripples and resonates across southeastern Connecticut. I also want to thank Scholastic for believing in this book. We need more like it. Finally, I want to thank Jarrett Krosoczka and his family. Thank you for telling your story and inspiring us to tell our own as a community. Thank you for seeing us. Thank you.
We're going to ask you to come back up, and if people would like to ask some questions of you, we'd be glad to have that happen. So.
Of course. Hi, everyone.
Did you wear orange intentionally? Because I know it's important to have that book.
I did wear orange intentionally. And perhaps I won't tell you why if you don't know, but I encourage you to read all the way to the very last word of the book. Thank you.
Jenny, I don't have a question. I have a comment more than a question. I think that what you did is show such a microcosm of our community and the need for all of us to come outside of ourselves and do what we can to help this community. Because, you know, when you talk about the overdoses, there are thousands of people living in this community struggling every day with their own disease of addiction and their children and their love for their children and the loss of the children. And I think that it's an important book at this point in time. And I knowing you and having worked with you, I just appreciate the way that you bring all of this to the forefront. And thank you. Thank you for being the person.
Your opening thing is about what you see. It's not just visual. Open your eyes and look about what's going on in our community. It's an ugly disease, and people don't want to look at it. You have a professor at your college that wrote a very brutal book about the addiction, about local people. I think a lot of people find it difficult to read. You know, the library wouldn't even buy it. You know, I asked them twice. That never really got a good answer for why, but it is an ugly disease and it's affecting everybody. So I appreciate your comment. What you see, open your eyes. That's all of us. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
I don't know that any treatment has been effective in reality for drug addiction. I even worry about how that may have somehow changed DNA also. I mean, these are the concerns because, you know, it's like, you know, people for a while can control it, and, you know, so often people relapse. And I just wonder what the answers are.
It's a great question. So what is treatment? You know, we have to think about living. It is a disease, living with a disease. And we have to think about the compassion we show to those living with breast cancer, something that touches me and my family personally. And we think about the pink ribbons and the pride with which people support different kinds of ailments, and rightfully so. I trust you've heard about my work with HIV. I believe in recognition. But I think too many people are quick to treat addiction like something else.
There's a difference between medical problems and diagnoses versus psychiatric kinds of problems and addiction. And those kinds of things people try and hide.
Which comes back to this other wonderful remark about opening our eyes and what do we see, and making ourselves see things that maybe we don't want to see, or maybe we're not comfortable seeing. But I guarantee you, with anything, the way to get comfortable with something, the way to solve a problem, which might be the closest I can come to answering the question about treatment, the way to solve a problem is by confronting, is by opening our eyes and trying to deal with it. And you know, I believe, as a theater professor, my motivation is not necessarily to stage the most incredible piece of glitzy performance ever. It's to spark conversation. And if we have sparked conversation, if we have gotten people to engage in a conversation about something beyond themselves as they leave that theater, then we've done something. And I think that the conversations around this book might lead us to some of the answers, to some of the questions that you've raised.
And some people have been innocently addicted because of the pills their doctors give them. They just give them pain pills.
Yeah.
So we have to be very careful what we put in our mouth.
Innocence is such a tricky word. But I understand. I mean, I think you're opening up the kinds of conversations that need to have. Like, how did we get here? You know, what kinds of inaction occurred? Where did, you know, when I teach my course of theater and the AIDS epidemic, we're looking at these things from a political perspective, from an economic perspective, from a medical perspective. You know, what are all of the forces that come into play to bring any one individual into the circumstances that they are? I mean, these are, I agree. I have a hard time with conceptions of innocence for that reason, that it implies guilt. But I think that this comment and this question and this concern might be a way in for a lot of people to talk about something that's not necessarily comfortable. So thank you. You had a question.
I think it's a federal law, a federal program. It's Americans with Disability Act, and I'm always impressed to see all the sidewalks pervasively have access for wheelchairs. There's public transportation signs on the side that indicate they have access for people with wheelchairs. And I'm wondering if there isn't something comparable for a disability like drug addiction. And I don't know what they would be. I can think of that, the drug you take when you have an overdose,
Narcan.
which is starting to show a lot of presence. I'm wondering if you know of anything else and if it even comes under the American with Disabilities Act.
Well, just so happens that I know Carol Jones from Alliance of Living, who's an expert in just this field. But I'm glad you brought up Narcan, because I think that is something that anybody can be trained to use and to have available. And we need it to be available anywhere and everywhere, and we need people to know how to use it. Carol, may I ask you to speak to
I
that?
mean, I don't want this to shift, but I think we want to recognize that substance use disorder is a disease, like any other disease in this world, and there are evidence-based treatments that do exist there's nowhere in this world that anybody would turn someone away for kidney disease, heart disease, cardiac disease, if they came into the hospital and into the emergency room for treatment. And so we are in a new paradigm around substance use disorder, and that is we have to realize it's a disease like other disease, and people need to be treated like anybody for their disease, and to not be looked at as it's a moral failing or it's a weakness or it's a disease. And it's a disease of return to use if it's not addressed. And there are treatments now, many treatments that have proven to be very successful. So, I would welcome anybody that, taking away from the book side, we do have an opioid action team in New London that meets, that can certainly, a New London Cares program that certainly can answer those questions. But part of that is to understanding what substance use disorder is, how it can be treated, and that it's not a moral failing, that just like heart disease, cardiac disease, cancer, anything that people go, it's the same kind of thing, and we have to start educating people about that and accepting it.
I'd like to make a comment in regards to the opening line, "Hey kiddo," and that's, like when you see someone, "Hey kiddo, how are you?" And I think in situations where there's drug disease, mental illness, that a child will not tell anybody the truth. And so it takes more than one "Hey kiddo" to get them to elaborate, if you're lucky, to get them to share their experiences, because a lot of times, once this child exposes what the situation is, they're removed from their homes.
Right.
And that's a fear that's much worse than living in that environment, I think.
I can only agree. But I want to just echo, in case anybody didn't hear, I think one of the most essential points in what you said, that it can take more than one "Hey kiddo." It can take patience and kindness. It can take creating a sense of safety, which I think is something that is so beautifully and yet subtly captured in this book. How the classroom, how those scenes where Jarrett is interacting with his teachers, especially his art teachers, when it's just him at his drawing board, you can tell he feels safe. And that's when he is most free to express some of the things that he's working through. And I think that the more that we can make ourselves available, like you're saying, interested, not afraid to hear some of the things that kiddos might say, I think our community will be stronger for it.
To wrap up tonight, I do want to call attention to when we will have Jarrett Krosoczka come to Connecticut College, which will be on September 17th at 7 p.m. in Palmer Auditorium. So please, everyone is invited to come to that to hear him speak. And he's generously going to be here for 2 days. He's going to spend one day talking to students in the community of Connecticut College, and then the next day he'll be out in the school community of New London, talking to and sharing with school children from various schools in the area. So he's really quite a generous person, and we're so looking forward to getting to know him more personally. As we wrap up, I do want to thank again some of my colleagues from Connecticut College who are instrumental in doing all the vaccines work and organizing this. So Kim Sanchez and Tiffany Thiel from the college, and thank you again, Jenny, for your remarks tonight, and thank you all for coming, and we look forward to seeing you in the conversations in the months ahead. So good night, everyone.